STEMology, the Young Scientist Survival Guide, Session 39. And welcome back, STEMologists. I hope you've made it here for part 2, the second part to our Minorities in STEM episode. And again, super excited. We have a lot of great material here to talk with you all about. Of course, I'm here with Keisha Avery and Dr. Janae Bradley. So welcome back, guys.
Hello.
You know, if you'd like a full refresher about who these two women are, go ahead and listen to part 1 and you'll get caught up on a lot of really great things. So even though we are releasing these a week apart, I don't think it would be a bad thing to go back and take a look at that part 1. So this time we're going to be talking a lot about, I guess, just being a Black woman in America. It's tricky. I feel like, no child should really have to grow up Black in America.
Right.
It's difficult.
Right. And then adding woman on that.
Yeah. So there's levels to it. And I don't want you guys to think of this as like, our sob stories or like, etc. Mm-hmm. I want you to develop an empathy and an understanding for what different communities and cultures are going through. Not everyone has the same experience. Even the things that us three will talk about here today are going to be a lot different than other experiences that other students might have had. And we are coming at this conversation from the viewpoint or from the perspective as Black women in STEM. But I want this to be maybe an open door for you all to start experiencing different cultures and being open to listening to different experiences, because a lot of it starts with you. It starts with, changing a mindset, understanding that, things are going to be different. They're going to be difficult. And this isn't an easy conversation. It's not going to be easy for us to talk about this, but it's important. So we're going to. Thank you for listening today, guys. Why don't we just jump in? How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start off with a few terms. There's a lot of vocabulary that kind of goes into this. It's always evolving. There's always going to be, new meanings. It's English. It's a live language. It's changing and always being added on to. But there's a few phrases that are kind of crazy. Crazy in the way that we even have to have a phrase for it, that it even exists. But the first one is tokenism. We've all kind of experienced this.
Yeah.
It is so hard to not become the token Black girl. It's so very hard, because as soon as you start trying to make a difference and be involved somehow, and I fight it so much, but somehow I'm still postered, plastered on a poster, and I'm just how did this happen? I worked so hard not to be that girl, but
you're literally plastered on a poster.
And you say this because you guys are on a couple different committees, right, at Mizzou to work towards diversity and inclusion. So what do you think?
Yeah. We're always the ones that get asked to do stuff. And some parts I'm it's a battle between if I don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Yeah.
Because there's really, especially when you talk about in engineering and you talk about grad students, and then it's just I want to be involved because I want to make sure these processes are fair, and then it's also dang, I'm overworked. What about my peers, especially my white peers that they just, all they have to focus in on is their work. Research. I'm over here battling my research, plus I'm worried about my experiences myself, plus I'm asked to be involved in stuff, and
it becomes so taxing.
Cultural taxing.
Yeah.
Right along with tokenism.
And it's so hard to say no. It's so hard.
It is.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to. You want to be kind of that mouthpiece. I was asked to give a presentation back in October and the presentation was about how do we increase engagement in Black community and the Latino community with STEM. And they asked me to do it, and at first I was like, okay, cool, it's because this is like part of my research. We're studying how to increase STEM engagement with the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. But then I looked around, and the other people that were involved in this work were white and Latinx, and I was like, okay. But then I noticed that I was the only Black woman, and that's why they asked me to do it, is because I had the most experience with the material. And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like I would be more comfortable talking about this than listening to, you know, a white man tell me about my experience.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, Janae, but I think part of the tokenism that comes from is just kind of like the thank you aspect of we get asked to do so many things, but we don't see anything in return. Like,
right. Like, yeah, Keisha says that because I don't feel appreciated where I'm at, you know, in the things that I've done. And it's just like, sometimes it's a simple thank you. Sometimes it's like doing other things, you know, and I think we had a conversation about negotiating too. When people are asking you to do certain stuff, it's kind of like, well, hey, yeah, if I do this, I need you to look out for me when I'm trying to go to this conference and I need help funding, or, you know, like negotiating these things so that if you are going to be used as a token, you might as well get something out of it.
And what's interesting is we had just did a talk with students who are interested in going to grad school, and we received an email of like, would you like a t-shirt?
Yes. They're getting us a t-shirt, Black Scientists Matter. And like, well, you can choose them. And I'm like, and gave us lunch too. Yeah. Over here like, see, this is compensation.
There we go.
I was just like, I did not expect the email. I was like, oh, like, this is the smallest thing, was like, oh, thank you so much.
Right,
like,
reciprocity.
Yeah.
You know, all of that. We're going to talk about it though. There's a couple other isms that I'd like to get into, like colorism, classism, ageism. What do you think about that? Hold on. First of all, let's define them here.
All right. I mean, colorism, I think we always, just being Black, we think of colorism between like light skin, dark skin, but it's not just in the Black community, right? Yeah. We just know of it because we experience it. But like, you have like what in India and like caste system, and like it's just all over. It's all over.
In Asia.
Asia.
Well.
Yeah, it's definitely all over.
I want to say like within also the Latinx community as well too, is that colorism.
Yeah, that kind of prejudice or discrimination against people that because of their shade, you
and
know,
that
shade
brings
skin
me
tone.
all the way back to like, I think they were doing this in the 70s. They had to have been doing it forever, but the brown paper bag.
Yeah.
If you're darker than a brown paper bag, you're not allowed into my club. If you are lighter than a brown paper bag, welcome. We love you.
Yeah. I feel like within being like Black or just a person of color in general is that we don't realize within our communities that we're multi-ethnic, and that race is something that's made up. So colorism is like an impact of racism. We all comes in off different shades and etc. But colorism is a result of racism.
And you'll see it at that macro level, but I notice it even at the micro level, even within my own family. My dad is Black and my mom is Latina. And so my brother and sister and I were a range of colors, and I happen to be the darkest. So my brother and sister would always go in on me in that, like, Alynah, look how dark your skin is, etc. And I'm like, what you talking about? Like, I look great. And they're like, they're super light skinned.
It is. And it's so interesting because like when you say family, for my family, I don't remember ever really thinking about colorism. It wasn't until I got to undergrad and college that it, like even in high school, I mean, granted, now looking back, I was like, oh, okay, when they did like superlatives and they chose like the light skinned girl with like curly hair, I was like, but like it didn't click then. Like that wasn't something that was really discussed or like just prevalent to me until I got to college. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, and then I always feel like I don't necessarily fit because I'm not light skinned. And then sometimes I'm like, well, they don't classify me as dark skinned, you know, then you get that brown skin. And I was like, well, what am I? Like, and some people are like, you really light? And I'm like, girl, I'm not light. And I actually would rather be like, yeah, dark skin girl.
Yeah.
Like,
I feel like got that pretty skin, that melanin popping. Yes. I used to do a lot of modeling from 14 to 18 years old. And I would always have a white makeup artist. I guess all the black ones are busy. I don't know. And so they would always match my skin tone with the darkest spot on my face is what they would say. So if I had like a pimple that had scabbed over or whatever, and so obviously that spot was a little dark, she would match my whole face to that one spot. And when I was 14, I was like, well, looking at the back of my hand and looking at my face, like, huh? But it didn't really click that, like, maybe she just didn't know what she was doing. Maybe there is a little bit of, colorism, racism, whatever going on there. But it affected even my modeling career, because I noticed that I started doing a lot less shows after that, because I was like, I just don't like the makeup. I don't like how that works. But it didn't click to me, but I should have just told her, like, hey, what are you doing? Like, why are you making my skin tone 10 shades darker? So
it's crazy how people just can't accept beauty. Like, there's beauty in skin tone just in general, from lightest to darkest. It's just beauty.
Yeah. And I definitely had issues with colorism from like such a young age and stuff, like where people are like you say, you're like, I didn't really pay attention to it until like, get into college, and people are like, oh yeah, really focused on this. For me, it happened so earlier. So like my family is like multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial. It's so awkward. Like not everybody's like, and I feel like with the Black community, everybody thinks mix is just black and white. And it's like, no, there are so many different forms of mixedness in this society. But just going to the school that I went to, I experienced colorism at elementary and junior high, where I just remember it wasn't necessarily colorism in the form of my skin tone as much, because when people see me, they're like, my skin, they're like, okay, you don't seem mixed based off your skin tone. But when it came to my hair, before I cut it, that was a huge issue. They're like, oh, you mixed, you white girl. And I'm like, I'm not. So I like remember like doing micro braids with my real hair just because I wanted to like appear more black. Or I did a big chop, like I cut 16 inches of my hair my senior year of high school, because I was like, what can make me seem more black? But it's so weird, because to white people, they're like, you're black.
You're black, yeah.
But
like,
but within my own community, I wasn't.
Yeah, it's crazy, because like black is a cultural identity. It's cultural identity. It's not always just a color, But they also say like, if you have even a drop of black blood, like you're black.
You're black, yeah.
But that's not
that
shown on equal
time.
levels. Yeah, it goes all the way back. But you'll also see like darker skinned Puerto Ricans, darker skinned Dominicans, darker skinned Caribbeans, Arabs.
Yeah.
And technically we could all be the same color as these other ethnicities, but they're not considered black, And so black is seen as like the bottom of this pyramid, this class system or whatever, when in reality we're all the same color. They just came from a different culture. So it's seen as better than, or etc., or just different. I don't know. But I remember telling someone, listening to this video, and in the video, this woman had referred to Jesus as a black man. And my white friend was listening. And after she went on for like 20 minutes, the only comment that he had about her comments was, well, Jesus wasn't black. And I was like, oh, well, he wasn't white. And he was like, yeah, but he wasn't black. He was Arab, Middle Eastern. And I was like, okay, well, he had dark skin. So I was just
and
a little
hair.
And curly hair. So
woolly hair, as they say.
I was just so confused how it could be translated as not black, even though him and I might have been the same skin tone, just because he came from a different part of the world.
And why can't someone who's Arab also be black? Like, why is there a difference? And I think that's the confusing part too with society, is they don't look at individuals of being multiple things. They're just like, you're either black or you're not.
Well, it's such a binary.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to be binary.
And it's interesting that you mentioned those European standards of beauty earlier when you said that you had chopped your hair, etc.
Within the black community, like when you look at mainstream and white standards, it's kind of like skinny. You want to be skinny, but within the black community, it's kind of like, ooh, like I want her to be thick. And for me, I was not thick. I was skinny. Like I got called anorexic because I was just small. And so like that standard of like what's mainstream, and then culturally, what like the opposite sex is looking for, like I just didn't fit that. So I was like, dang it, like I can't grow. Like puberty hasn't hit me yet. Like, I don't know what to do, you know, to be thicker and things like, especially when I said I went to a predominantly Black high school. So that's all that was looked at. So.
And a lot of that fits in with, you know, meritocracy. So if you're seen as too dark, if you're seen as different in a way that isn't, I guess, appreciated in your community, then they align that with, or I should say that they malalign that with who you are and what you're capable of. And they give you like this glass ceiling of what you can achieve.
Yeah. Again, labels and telling you what you can or can't be. I think we've talked about that in terms of like school as well, of like placing a label of like, you come from this socioeconomic background, you're underrepresented, from an underrepresented group in terms of not just socioeconomics, but, you know, it can be sexual orientation, it can be, you know, race or ethnicity, but just labeling you as like, you're not going to do this, or you're only going to do this well, or maybe you should think about doing something else because, you know, statistics say that you're not going to do well in that.
Yeah, it doesn't fit you into that box that they give you.
Right. And they're giving you a ceiling already. And I feel like when I got my PhD, I feel like my brother said, like, you shattered the ceiling for yourself. And I was like, dang, that's so powerful, because I feel like I get boxed in, and like coming in, you know, there's nobody in my family that was STEM. So that's the whole discussion itself of navigating that space, but going to grad school and getting my doctorate. And like, I came in pre-engineering, statistics say I shouldn't have made it. I'm from an underrepresented group. Statistics say I shouldn't have made it. You know, I didn't have a perfect GPA. Like, I brought my GPA all the way up from like a 2.8 to like a 3.1. Statistics say that like, you shouldn't have, you know, like GPA like that and, you know, make it to grad school. So it's like shattering these ceilings that people are putting on you, and then keep going, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like it was like once again, me battling that middle ground of, I had the expectations of these like European standards, and like at a PWI, white people saying like, you can't do this, or you can only do this, to also embracing have to navigate through the privileges within the Black community too. So with the socioeconomic standpoint too, as well as those who weren't first generation versus first generation as well, that was really hard, because I don't think we even talk about that sometimes. And like, I will walk into a room and someone will be like, oh, well, why aren't you doing this? Like, I admit having a roommate during fall 2015 who she would withdraw from all of her classes and was just like, I need to take a mental break, which I'm like, okay, that's cool. But like, and she was Black as well, but I was like, I don't have that option. Like, you know, her mom like had bought her, like, she had a brand new SUV. They're like, just withdraw from your classes, take a mental break. You know, we'll pick back up, you know, we'll pay for them next semester. And I'm sitting here like,
I'm over here taking out loans just so I can pay for stuff. Like, there is no,
I was like, there's no break. Yeah, I was like, I have to like deal with this protest and still go to class every day. Like, she's like, why are you still going to campus? And I'm like, I have to. Yeah. So it was like really hard kind of battling that. And of course, it wasn't taking away her experience of being Black, but it was also understanding that we had like two different experiences within that.
Same culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when the protests were going on, they were happening right outside my front window. And we were in the middle of a pandemic, but it felt like as a Black woman, I was going through two pandemics, you know, trying to fight off COVID, trying to fight off racism and social justice. And at the time, I was studying to take my MCAT, and I couldn't focus to save my life, because I would go to sleep crying every night, watching these videos of different instances of police brutality, of people trying to undermine what I was feeling or what the country was going through, and just saying like, oh, well, if they just wouldn't do this, if they just wouldn't do that, then maybe they'd still live. And, you know, I was really going through it. And then trying to wake up every day and study for that test wasn't happening for me. And then I would look over and see all my white friends all just, you know, studying away like nothing was going on. They're like, oh, this is just an extra break, extra time to study harder. And I felt like that was a privilege that I wasn't able to have, was because I was going through all this other mental trauma, emotional trauma. It wasn't 100% just a break for me to relax and focus on this test. And a lot of them look at me even now like, oh, well, why did you decide to take a gap year? Like, you had all this extra time to study and prepare. Like, wasn't that your break? And I felt like there was a lot of privilege in that statement to be able to look at me and be like, why couldn't you have worked through that? Why couldn't you have, figured it out? And it was hard.
The fact that it's like a privilege in itself to feel like you can take a break and not have guilt from taking a break.
Yeah.
Like you said, when the pandemic hit, like, I just felt like I felt like I was losing a lot. I was supposed to graduate in May, have my doctorate. And then all of a sudden I'm like, it's not happening. And then you have the protests that are happening, right? And so not only that got into the discussion of like, when you talk about like hashtag Black Lives Matter, the difference between the portrayal of Black men in media, these hashtags, and Black women don't get the same, attention. Yeah. And so that's a whole discussion in itself. And it was that, and then, just thinking I was going to graduate and I wasn't. And then the fear, like, you're in a whole pandemic, that I was just like, I had to tell my PI, like, I was depressed. Keisha would call me and I was like, yeah, I'm sleeping. It'd be like the middle of the day. I was sleeping all the time. And I had to tell my advisor, I was like, both of them, I was like, I have to take a break. And I took 2 weeks, but even then I felt guilt of taking that break. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that had the luxury to, even my advisors were letting me do that. And I still was like, oh man, I should be doing this and I should, but I was like, I can't, like, I physically cannot write.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I totally understand. That's where I am now. And my advisor is like, please take all next week off. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, and I'm like, how do I do that?
To work through it. Sometimes it's easier too to work through it. Like it depends on the person, I guess. So I think that there's nothing wrong with taking a break when you need it, but getting yourself to feel okay with taking that break is a whole other story.
Yes.
That also kind of brings up, I'd already talked about it, but that dispositional versus situational thinking, where you look at someone taking that break and you're like, perhaps if it's a white person, you're like, oh, okay, like they just needed it. They're going through a lot. Etc. But then if a Black person takes the same break, you're like, oh, well, they just can't handle it. They don't deserve to be here. They're lazy. There's a different kind of thinking that goes on. And it's not just with this situation. You'll see it in the lab when someone turns in homework and someone doesn't. You're like, okay, well, why didn't they turn in their homework? Are they just lazy, or are they not smart enough to finish it? There's a whole different type of thinking that goes along versus race and things like that.
Yeah, just like I even asked a professor, because I was like, I didn't feel like showing up for class, but because there's nobody else that looks like me in there, they're gonna notice when I'm not there. And I actually asked, I was like, do you notice when your underrepresented students don't come, especially when you're talking about ethnicity or even gender or sex?
Yeah.
Then you're like, and they're like, yeah, I do. And I'm like,
I knew it.
And then what is it, right? And what is the assumption? And I once asked, if I'm not there, what is your assumption? That why I'm not there.
That's an important question. Like, how people perceive your actions is different than what the actual action is and why you decided to move that way. So
yeah, and it's so like uncomfortable, because I feel like, once again, it's like you're tiptoeing around like eggs that you don't want to break, and you're just like, okay, well, if I do this, will it be perceived this way? Or if I do this, would it be perceived this way? And it's like, it feels like sometimes you can truly not necessarily be yourself, and you just endure whatever you have to endure just to get through. It's like, I don't know, like, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like in myself, I start losing myself, because then now I have to be perceived of how others perceive me. And I forget to figure out who I actually am within these processes.
That goes for more than just actions, like your words, the way you dress, maybe how your hair looks that day, whether or not you have your edges out.
I feel like that falls too under, like, I feel like whatever I do, words, actions, the way I look, can sometimes, like, people can take that and make it represent everybody else.
Everybody, yes.
And I'm just, or everybody else is a woman, and I'm just like, oh, I have to be careful with what I do, because somebody might take it and make it a stereotype.
Yes, 100%. And there's a lot of balancing that we have to do. And again, I'll use myself as an example, because I'm one of those people where I don't want to leave my acceptance in a medical school up to chance, you know, like I want to make sure that I did every single thing I could to get to where I want to go. And by doing that, like right now, I have 5 jobs, including this podcast, that I don't get paid for, but I have 5 jobs and I'm taking full-time classes, and I'm the president of a student organization that I founded on campus, and about 100 other things. I pay my own bills, I have my own car, etc. And my friends always say, like, I don't understand how you do it. I don't understand how you make all this happen. And it's like, I do it because I have to. Like, I don't have a choice. I do it because where I want to go, there's not very much leeway. There's not very much like, oh, okay, well, yeah, we'll give it to you anyways. Like, it's not always like that. So I don't want to leave it up to chance. There's a lot of balancing and internal struggles that we have to go through. And like you said, like sometimes it's a lot more than just, can you do it? Or like, it's not individualized anymore. Sometimes it spreads out and reaches a lot of different corners that you never intended it to reach.
And like, even I feel like with our white counterparts, when you hear, of course you're doing that, or of course you're doing this, and it make it seems like, it's like once they're like also praising us, but at the same time, they're like, I don't know how to explain it. But it's like, sometimes when I hear that from my white counterparts, I'm like, you seem to be complimenting me, but at the same time, it seems to be like, you don't understand why we're being asked to do stuff or why we're doing the things that we do. So it almost becomes like, of course you're doing this, like in a sense of, it's because this is who you are. And it's just kind of like, no, it's so much deeper than what you expect. And it's like really weird, because I've been hearing that a lot more lately. And I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and I was like, of course you're doing this, da da da. I was like, well, you can be doing this too. And they're like, oh, but you're Black. And I'm like, yeah, but STEM, we need allies. Like, this doesn't just fall on the face of me. Like, why aren't you doing this as well? Oh, it doesn't pertain to me, but it does. So like, it's like really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge conversation. I don't think people realize that racism affects everybody. It doesn't just affect Black people. It affects everybody in every single thing. You know, we have defund the police and affirmative action and all these progressive policies that we're trying to push. And there's a reason why. It's because it's not just going to obviously improve conditions and affect the Black community, but it's going to affect the whole country.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, having to break down what defund the police was to, like, somebody asked me, a professor asked me, and they're like, I didn't understand it. And she's like, I didn't know if it was going to be like, we just have no police system. I'm like, no. And that's where I was like, oh, defund people. I'm like, I wonder if there could be a better word, like restructure or refund, because it's so much more. Like, it's not saying we don't want, you know, well, some people may be like, you know, you have some people that are very radical and like, oh God, but they're saying like how you allocate resources and like having people that can handle situations with their mental health issues, because a lot of times when that happens, those people that have that mental health issue end up dead. You know, especially when you get into somebody that's a person of color.
Yeah. But then you'll hear, why not just train them better? So why can't we just train them better?
So I watched this episode on YouTube called Uncomfortable Conversation with a Black Man. It was a bunch of police officers having a conversation with him, and the defund the police came up, and a police officer was like, we will love to have someone who can deal with those mental health issues, but we're the one who called for those situations. So I think that stated right there, and I like shared it with everyone. I was like, you guys should see this. Like, police are saying like they are for the aspect of defunding, in a sense of not receiving
training
and those aspects, but hiring someone else to be able to address those situations. And I think, like Janae said, the word defund comes off very like, oh, we want to get rid of the police, but there's actually police officers who agree with that concept. They just don't like the word that comes with it.
There are a lot of responsibilities that police officers have, and I don't think people understand like how much they have to do for their job. It's a lot more than just protect and serve the community. I 100% support defund the police because of the actual meaning and the actual representation of what it means to defund the police. And of course, you know, the word choice that we use, the defund term, might be misleading to some, but please don't stop at face value. Like, actually take a look at what it means, and then make your own educated decision on what that entails and why people are so for it or against it.
Yeah, and it simply goes for just public schools and seeing police in these schools, and you're like, it could be so uncomfortable for individuals, or even making, like you said, for the mental health cause. Like, if someone is saying like, oh, they're suicidal, a police officer come, but they might have a bad experience with a police officer. Like, why aren't like public schools, like money's going towards police being in public schools instead of them having better counselor systems, or like all these kind of things? And that was the biggest talk around defund the police, is that there's more funding going into like militant training for police, but schools are lacking in funding, when that funding from the city can go towards the schools rather than going towards the police.
100%.
Yeah.
So then what would a perfect world be like? Like, if we could restructure the police and reallocate funds to all these different resources that need just as much, if not more, attention, like, what would happen? Why would that be important?
We're all like just rebuild the whole thing.
First of all,
because there's just so much that you have to play catch up.
That's not a loaded question. What do you mean?
And I think it's just like, when he's like, you have to get, because there's so many factors that play, and I feel like capitalism is the biggest that play into the role of, we can't restructure things, because when you think about like racism and sexism and
it's built into the system.
And all of that is built off the aspect of classism and capitalism, consumer demand. Like, we have to really
you'd have to 100% start from the bottom and build up. It's not just okay, well, let's just pick racism out of this bundle, let's just pick classism out of here, let's just pick etc. Like, no, like, it's all interwoven into to reconstruct or to rebuild. One aspect of it is to tear all of it down. And that's scary for a lot of people.
It is because it's not the normal, you know what I mean? And I think when we talk about, there's this big talk of like student loan and canceling student loan, and some people are like, well, I paid for mine, and and I think it just, like, you would have to like fast forward 300 years, 400 years for just Black people of us being behind, or being, when you get into slavery, you get into Reconstruction, then redemption period, then you get into Jim Crow. Like, there's so many hundreds of years that it's like, we need to just speed it up and then take it and then put it down. Like, you know what I mean? So that we can play catch up, because a lot of, like, my grandma was born in 34 and my dad's in 52, my mom's 61. Like, they're during the time of segregation. So like, those chances, those opportunities just aren't there. And it's so crazy, because I'm like, imagine the perfect world where the people that like were murdered, for Blacks, when you talk about like from racism, like, had the opportunity that these brilliant people that we will never know about, that could have changed society, could have moved technology, could have moved, when you talk about climate change, environment, like all health, move all of this forward, but they were never given the chance because the color of their skin, or because of their gender or sex. Like, how I think about this, how far ahead we could have been in the lives that are lost, that could have been brilliant people, and those that weren't even lives lost, but were just brilliant, but never given the chance, or like, we're like, you have to stay in this box. This is your ceiling. Like, how far our country could just be ahead, the world could be ahead. Like, it just makes me sad.
And I even think about it too, as I had this conversation with one of my mentees the other day, of just looking at North America in general. North America was indigenous land, and she is Mexican American, and she was just talking about how much she have just learned about her culture and why she's into natural resources and corn and stuff. And she realized that in her family, she is a product of the oppressed and the oppressor, or the oppressed and the oppressed, and the oppressor. And she's basically was just saying that, like, we wish we can go back and realized, like, just talking about Mexico in general, of it used to just be indigenous land, and that, you know, she was just talking about, I think there was a quote she mentioned of like, she doesn't know her native tongue because Spanish wasn't her native tongue and colonization happened. So it was interesting talking about, like, if we can have a perfect world, how do we wipe those aspects? And that migration was happening at the time, but people weren't colonizing it. So like all of these indigenous tribes were working together, but not necessarily colonizing these places and overthrowing it. And I think that's like one of the part of where it comes to as well, is that so much of culture and everything has been lost through colonization, that honestly the perfect world is a non-colonized world. Like, and that spoke like really heavily, because then those aspects didn't exist. And just my experience of being in New Mexico a few summers ago is like walking in some of the native tribes or pueblos, and like looking and seeing like people who looked at me, I'm like, Afro-Indigenous groups, you know, is like my grandmother.
Which that's so not talked about.
No,
of that, like, just there's so much culture, and just it's just amazing how it just crosses so many different cultures and ethnicities. And you know, when you say Black, it can mean so much, so very much.
And it's crazy because it's like when I hear about the stories of these indigenous communities, that's what I thought of a perfect world, because everyone looked so different, but they didn't consider each other different.
And they respected each other and went about their lives as normal. Everyone, you know.
Yeah.
And accepting that people are different, being okay with it. You know what I mean? Because it's like when people are like, I don't see color, it's like, no, I want you to see my color.
Yeah.
Right? Because it makes me who I am.
That
the
is
culture
so
that comes
harmful.
with it.
It's
right?
so
But it's just
harmful,
like, that doesn't mean it should affect your decisions about me.
Exactly.
It just means that you want to learn more about my background and my experiences.
And I have had to try to explain before why it's harmful when people say, oh, I just don't see color. I don't notice that you're Black. Well, that hurts my feelings, honestly. Like, you know, outside of even my feelings, like, it hurts, because why don't you notice that I'm different? And why is it wrong to notice that I'm different? Why is it wrong to notice that we're not the same?
Yeah, it's like you're neglecting my whole culture and who I am, like my identity.
As if it was wrong or if it was not okay.
Yeah. It's just like, now what do you look at me like a blank wall? Like, it's just, sometimes it's like how I feel, and they're like, oh, I'm colorblind. I'm like, that's not even funny. Like, yeah, it's really interesting just kind of hearing that. And I've heard that like probably most of my life until like a situation happened. And I remember having a situation of my ex-boyfriend who was white saying, oh, I forgot you were Black. And I'm like,
hold up.
Yeah, I'm like, so what did you think I was this whole time? Like,
well, it's almost like they're trying to like cancel out that part of you, as if like, oh, it doesn't matter, but it matters to me. It's who I am. It's 100% who I am, and what makes me me. And I kind of want to bring up holidays for a second, because you know, we have Columbus Day, even upcoming, even Thanksgiving, 4th of July. All of these holidays are not made for Black people. They're not made for anyone who is colored or is of a different culture than white.
I mean, I can also contest of just also Christmas and Easter too. And I feel like that's also a false ideology that within Black people, every Black person isn't Christian. I'm not, you know, half of my family is Hindu and Buddhist. So like, it's also like a conversation that's also neglected as well. And that's also ingrained within like the culture of the US too, even within our Pledge of Allegiance, and like saying, in God we trust and stuff. And I think that's a conversation that gets torn away to when we're talking about what holidays are also meant. It's like the intersectionality that we forget to think about as well.
People ignore it when it makes them a little uncomfortable. But when you feel uncomfortable, I feel like you need to look inside yourself, think about it internally, and be like, why am I uncomfortable with this? Why does it make me feel weird when someone says like, oh, well, I don't celebrate Christmas? You know, it shouldn't make you feel weird. It's a fact. It's just the way it is. And it has nothing to do with you or your beliefs or anything. And it doesn't have to. People don't have to be on the same line of thinking as you. People are valid in their own existence.
No, I completely agree. I grew up, I'm Christian, but my mom works at a Jewish community center. So they have all these holidays, you know, and they don't celebrate Christmas, right? But I grew up in that. So I'm all like, yay, Hanukkah. And like, yeah, we're going to have matzah and like challah, you know what I mean? But understanding that necessarily wasn't my, you know, religion, but still celebrating, you know, that different, that somebody that was different than me, and being okay with it and being like, oh yeah, my best friend at one point, she was Muslim. So like, she didn't celebrate like, Christmas and things like that. And that was just a culture being immersed in that too, because she also was African, and was an immigrant. So like talking with her about that and being immersed in her culture and all of that was pretty cool. And just being okay with that. Like,
it is a major limitation as a professional in healthcare, in science, and STEM in general, to not have that cultural competency, to not understand what other people are going through, to not have empathy for other religions or cultures, etc. That is a huge limitation, to only see the world from your own point of view and not for anyone else's, especially when you're working to make life better for a whole country or for the whole world, you know?
It's okay to like not know and ask, you know what I mean? And I think that's the hard part too, is that I don't think people are comfortable with asking and having those conversations. And I think it's important, and this speaks for everyone. I understand this conversation is like, how are we navigating as Black women or just Black in STEM? But even for ourselves, is asking each other like, hey, what do you do? You know, instead of assuming. And coming back to the standpoint, I thought it was interesting kind of how I feel like this has been the first time publicly I acknowledge that I don't really want to celebrate Christmas in that regards, but I feel like I never had the option. Based off of kind of like what you said, is that like, you're like, oh, I was at a Jewish community, or I had a friend who was like African and an immigrant. I don't fit those categories of someone that might not, you could say, oh, I can see why they might not be that religion or that culture. You know, I don't fit that. So sometimes like I've been in this predicament where I don't feel comfortable with saying no one perceives me to be different in that way.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think it should be normalized, being different. Mental health is probably going to be our last topic for today, because it's incredibly important, and it's something that's kind of neglected in all communities as being important. So what do you got for me?
Especially in like, at least from my experience, because I'm Black, in the Black community, it's such a taboo, because especially when you get into religion and that thought process is like, oh, you just pray it away, you know, just pray about it, and it's like, you can still pray and get help, you know what I mean? Like for me, and I'm like, this summer was the first time that I went and got a therapist, because I was just like I said, I didn't feel like myself. And even when you don't feel like yourself, I feel like mental health and therapy is so beneficial, even if you feel like I'm great, because you learn about things that you do, like how your past influences the things that you do now. And there were so many times that I'm like, dang, yeah, I didn't realize that. Or like, I just needed to talk through things that I'm a person that I like take things in and I don't always deal with them. I'm just like, all right, it is what it is. Like, I'm just gonna keep moving. And so when I'm in there, and my therapist is like, no, stop. Like, let's dissect this. How are you feeling in that moment? And I'm like, I swear, almost every session I was in there, like, you know, like cry. And I was like, yeah, I did feel like that. You're right. She's like, no, you know, like just dealing with that. So then now when I talk about certain things, like, I don't feel like I have to hide it.
Yeah, you come from a place of power.
Right. Or I'm not crying, trying to talk about it. And I think and again, like, you don't have to go to a therapist if you feel like you have problems. You can go, just like, it's nice to have somebody has an objective opinion about you.
Yeah. That's real. And I can't wait to get to the point where I can talk about stuff without crying, because I think I am there. And it's really interesting because you said like this was your first time actually going to therapy this summer, which I've been in therapy for years, and I don't think I've ever allowed myself to be vulnerable. This is like the first time I actually been vulnerable, and it's been coming out.
like I don't really, Keisha knows I'm not super emotional person, or at least I don't express it, very much.
Well,
so
there's like this whole, mindset of like the strong Black woman, the stoic, unfeeling, etc. But that is incredibly harmful to the Black community and Black women, because then people think, oh, I can just do this, say this, expect this, and they won't feel it or they won't notice because, they're strong women. They could take care of it. And that's, kind of the oppressor's way, or even Black men do this. It's their way of doing or behaving, saying whatever they want and feeling okay with that decision.
Yeah. My therapist definitely was talking about that. She's like, Janae, if you keep doing like overextending yourself, people think that's just your normal. So then they're going to start asking for more, boundaries.
Yeah.
That's something that's always tough. Boundaries. And like, yes. And then also being comfortable with vulnerability. Cause I definitely, that's not me. Of being vulnerable.
It's like, it's so interesting. Cause it's like, I can hear you talking about it of being like, maybe it's something that's not necessarily like your strength, but like for me as your friend, I find it as a strength as well. It might not be for you personally, but when you give advice, you like level me. Like you call it like, Keisha, it's okay. And I'd be like, it is okay.
And I think there's levels to vulnerability and transparency, because there's some things that I don't talk about, and then there's other things where like people are like, Janae, you're always so transparent. And it's like, yeah, for those things. And I think we pick and choose what we want to be vulnerable on.
Yeah. And I definitely think I've been there on the pick and choosing side. And my therapist broke this down. I was like, oh, I'm an open book. I tell people all of these things. And she was like, but these are all the things that you've told me that doesn't seem like you told anybody else. And I was like, ooh. Like I was like, don't be calling me out like that.
Right? Come in my throat.
And I was like, oh crap. Like I am definitely a picker or chooser, where I make myself appear so talkative, outgoing, emotional, but then there's all this pain that I just hold in because I'm like, I why did anybody need to know that? Like,
So sometimes that's really what you need, just a second to really just look at yourself and think like, what do you need right now? And a lot of times it's not going to match up with what you think the people around you expect of what you need, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much. This has been very exciting and, kind of revealing episode of a lot of different things about society. And it was extremely topic heavy. There was a lot going on, probably a lot of concepts and ideas that students aren't really, used to hearing about or understanding or thinking about things in a different perspective. I know a lot of the viewers are in high school or, high school or first couple years of college. And so this might be whole new concepts to you 100%, but I don't think you should shy away from it. I think that there's a lot of power in just feeling other people's pain and their excitement and their, their emotions and their passions. And it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes. You'll learn a lot of uncomfortable things about who you are and the way that you think and the way that you experience things. But there's also nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of power and vulnerability, as Janae and Keisha have found out. So this has been great. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
In the next episode of the Stemology podcast, I am sad to say that this will be my finale. I am going to hang up the hat, I suppose you might say, on the first season of the Stemology podcast. 2020 has been it's been a year, y'all, but it's been a great year, actually. I have been able to really just sit back and acknowledge everything that I have. I've been a lot more appreciative, a lot more loving. I've been able to slow down and really, smell the roses, as one might say. And I can really thank 2020 for that in a lot of ways. That's not to say that it hasn't been disappointing and full of regret and heartache and tragedy And I don't want to minimize that, but I do think it's important to acknowledge the different blessings that we've been given and the experiences that we've had over these last 10 months, 10 grueling months. But thank you for coming on this journey with me. If you'll tune in to episode 40 of the Smology podcast, I guess I'll go a little bit more in detail and give you some of my final thoughts on this first season and my hopes and revelations, I guess, for 2021 and what I hope that we all are able to bring into this new year. I love you all so dearly for tuning into every episode and going on this crazy wild journey with me. There's a lot going on in these next years, and I know this year has been so tough on so many different levels for all of you students out there and my listeners who aren't students too. I know that coming together and being there for one another has been really what's holding us up and bringing us through it. So thank you all. So tune in for episode 40, the end of season 1. See you next time.